My name is Eliana. I'm 43 years old, and the day my children told me to stop talking about the past was the day I realized how little they truly knew about me. It didn't come as a scream or a fight, it came quietly, almost casually, like an afterthought tossed into the middle of a conversation. But those words hit me harder than any argument ever could. I was sitting at the dining table, sipping lukewarm coffee as I told my daughters, Naomi and Claire, about a time when I worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. It was a story I thought might help them, something about perseverance, about survival, about not depending on anyone else to rescue you. I thought it might remind them how strong they could be, how resilient. But before I could finish, Naomi rolled her eyes. "Mom, can you not? You're always bringing up the past. It's depressing." And Claire, who usually stayed quiet, chimed in with a frustrated sigh. "Yeah, we get it. You struggled. You don't have to keep repeating it. Honestly, it feels like you're stuck there, Mom. Maybe it's time to just move on." The words cut through me like a knife. For a second, I couldn't even breathe. Move on? How could I move on from the years that shaped me, the scars that still burned when I closed my eyes? My past wasn't some bedtime story I liked to rehash. It was the very reason I'd survived long enough to sit at this table with them. I looked at Naomi, 22 years old, smart, beautiful, headstrong. She had her father's eyes, though she'd never admit it. And Claire, my younger one, just 20. Sweet, impulsive, with a laugh that used to light up the darkest rooms. They had grown into such independent women, but at that moment, I felt an ocean between us. I forced a smile and whispered, "I only talk about it because I don't want you making the same mistakes I did." Naomi pushed her phone aside and leaned back in her chair. "But we're not you, Mom. Just because something bad happened to you doesn't mean it's going to happen to us. Honestly, you're kind of projecting your trauma onto us." Projecting. That word stung. I had spent my entire adult life protecting them, shielding them from truths that would have broken them as children. And now, they were accusing me of projecting. I stared down at my hands. They were rougher than they should have been at my age, calloused from years of cleaning houses, waiting tables, working late nights just to pay bills. Those hands had wiped away their tears, braided their hair, packed their school lunches when I barely had enough money to feed myself. And yet, to them, all of it was just the past. Something I should bury. Like it never happened. I remember forcing a laugh to hide how much their words hurt. "You'll understand one day," I said softly. But Claire shook her head. "Maybe. Or maybe we'll just learn on our own. Without dragging all of your stuff into it. We're not kids anymore, Mom. We don't need lectures about things that happened decades ago." That was the part that nearly broke me, not kids anymore. I had raised them to be independent, but in their independence, they had erased me. I wasn't a mother with wisdom to share, I was just a broken record reminding them of pain they didn't want to acknowledge. After they left the room, laughter echoing from the hallway as they planned a night out with friends, I sat alone at the table. My coffee had gone cold, untouched. The silence of the house felt heavier than it ever had. I thought about everything I had sacrificed. The nights I cried myself to sleep after Victor, their father, walked out. The years of humiliation, begging landlords not to evict us. The way I'd swallowed my pride and endured insults from bosses just to keep a paycheck coming in. And still, I tried to make their childhood feel normal. Birthday parties with dollar store decorations, secondhand clothes I washed until they looked new. Meals stretched from almost nothing. And yet, in their eyes, it wasn't wisdom. It wasn't resilience. It was just baggage. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My daughters had silenced me, but the silence only made my memories scream louder inside my head. They thought the past was something I clung to, but they didn't understand it was the blueprint of their lives, the reason they even had a chance at a future. I realized then that I had made a mistake. In trying to protect them, I had hidden too much. I had told them pieces of the truth, but never the whole thing. I wanted them to have light, not darkness, so I shielded them from the ugliest parts. But in shielding them, I had also blinded them. They didn't see the dangers I saw lurking in their choices. Naomi, dating a man who reminded me far too much of her father. Claire, spending recklessly as though money grew on trees. They thought my warnings were just relics of a bitter woman. But I knew better. I had walked those roads, and I could see, with terrifying clarity, where theirs would lead. That was the night I decided silence would no longer be an option. If my daughters wouldn't let me talk about the past, then I would find another way. I would show them how the past was still alive in every choice they made, every risk they ignored, every heartbreak waiting to happen, and I would do it in a way they couldn't brush off. Because the truth is, my story wasn't finished, not in the past, not even in the present. It was living inside of them, shaping them, guiding them toward mistakes they didn't even know they were about to make. So if they refused to listen to my words, I would give them no choice but to live through my lessons. I wasn't going to just tell them my past anymore. I was going to rewrite their future. And that night, instead of crying myself to sleep, I decided their ignorance would end whether they wanted to hear it or not. The truth is, my past was not a story I told to dwell, it was a story I told to warn. But sitting at that table after my daughters dismissed me, I realized just how little they knew. They thought they understood my life, but they only knew fragments. They knew about the divorce. They knew I worked hard. They knew I sometimes cried when an old song came on the radio. But they didn't know the full weight of it. They didn't know the nights I clutched them as babies, praying they wouldn't wake up hungry when there was nothing in the fridge. They didn't know the fear of listening for footsteps outside the door, wondering if their father had come back drunk again. They didn't know because I never told them. And the person I had shielded them from the most was their father, Victor. Victor wasn't always a monster. When I first met him, I was 19, and he was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, older, confident in a way that made me feel safe. I mistook his control for protection. I mistook his attention for love. By the time I realized the truth, I was already trapped. At first, the manipulation was subtle. He wanted to know where I was going, who I was with. He'd call it caring. He'd say, "I just worry about you, Eliana." And I believed him. I wanted so badly to be loved that I ignored the warning signs. When Naomi was born, his mask started to slip. He hated crying, hated diapers, hated the responsibility. He disappeared for hours, sometimes days, and when he came back, he reeked of alcohol and perfume. I asked questions once, and he answered with the back of his hand. That was the night I learned silence could keep me alive. By the time Claire came along, I had already perfected the art of pretending. To my friends and family, I smiled. To my daughters, I sang lullabies and read bedtime stories. But behind closed doors, I walked on eggshells. One wrong word, one misplaced look, and Victor's temper exploded. There were nights I locked the girls in their room and sat outside their door, bruised and terrified, whispering promises that I would keep them safe. They never knew that sometimes those promises felt like lies. Because how do you promise safety when you can't even guarantee your own? I worked whenever I could. Waitressing, cleaning offices, babysitting for neighbors, anything that brought in money. But Victor always seemed to find a way to spend it. Gambling, drinking, buying gifts for women who weren't me. I told myself I was staying for the children, but deep down, I was staying because I didn't believe I could survive without him. The breaking point came when Naomi was 4 and Claire was 2. Victor came home drunk, angrier than I had ever seen him. He accused me of cheating, which was ironic considering the lipstick stains I had scrubbed from his shirts for months. That night, he threw a chair against the wall so hard it splintered. The girls woke up screaming, and I ran to their room. I remember holding them, rocking them, whispering, "It's okay, Mommy's here," while my own heart pounded like it might burst out of my chest. The next morning, when he left for work, I packed 2 small bags, scooped up my daughters, and left. I didn't even take all of their toys. I just grabbed diapers, clothes, and enough cash to get a taxi to my cousin's apartment across town. I thought it would be temporary. I thought maybe Victor would change. But he never did. What followed were the hardest years of my life. I filed for divorce, but he dragged it out. I begged for child support, but he dodged every payment. I worked until my hands ached and my feet blistered, all while trying to smile at my little girls so they wouldn't see how broken I felt inside. And yet, through it all, I stayed silent about the details. I never told Naomi and Claire how bad it really was. I never told them about the bruises I covered with makeup, or the panic attacks that made it hard to breathe. I never told them about the nights I skipped meals so they could eat. Instead, I told them stories. I told them about how we were adventurers moving to new places, when in reality, we were being evicted. I told them about special pajama picnics when we had no table to sit at. I told them about how strong and brave they were, because I needed them to believe it even when I didn't believe it about myself. But now, as young women, they only see the surface. They see me as someone who can't stop clinging to old pain. They don't see that the past I keep bringing up isn't about me, it's about them. It's about protecting them from walking straight into the traps I barely escaped. Naomi thinks she's too smart to be fooled by a man. She doesn't realize how quickly charm can become chains. Claire thinks money will always come, that overspending is harmless fun. She doesn't realize how quickly debt becomes a prison. They don't know, because I didn't tell them. I wanted them to grow up free from the shadows I lived under. But my silence has come back to haunt me. By protecting them from the truth, I may have left them unprepared for it. That realization burned in my chest. They dismissed me because I had failed to explain why I spoke of the past at all. They didn't understand that my words weren't nostalgia, they were warnings. Every story was a roadmap of dangers I wanted them to avoid. So, I sat on my bed that night, staring at the ceiling, and made myself a promise. If my daughters refused to let me talk about the past, then I would find another way. I would no longer hide the details. I would no longer shield them from the ugliness. They were adults now. They needed to see everything I had endured, even the parts that made me tremble to remember. Because if I stayed silent, they would walk into the same storms blind. And I refused to let that happen. If my daughters wouldn't let me speak the past, then I would show them how that past was still shaping their future. It hurt more than words can capture the way my children began treating me like an old record stuck on repeat. Naomi and Claire didn't just brush off my stories about the past, they brushed off me. They saw my voice as background noise, something to tune out when it didn't fit the rhythm of their lives. And every time it happened, I felt the distance between us growing wider, like a chasm I couldn't cross. Naomi, my eldest, was the most outspoken. At 22, she carried herself with a kind of confidence I admired. But sometimes that confidence blinded her. She was head over heels for a man named Travis, a tall, smooth-talking charmer who reminded me so much of Victor that it made my stomach twist. He called her Princess, showered her with compliments, and had just enough mystery to make her lean in closer when she should have been stepping back. One night, Naomi came home glowing after a date. I asked casually how it went, trying not to sound worried. She smiled and said, "Mom, he's different. He really gets me." I wanted to tell her that's exactly how Victor had made me feel once upon a time. That different wasn't always safe. That sometimes, the ones who get you the most are the ones who use that knowledge to break you. But when I tried to caution her, Naomi rolled her eyes. "Not everything is about Dad, Mom. You really need to stop projecting." That word again. Projecting. It was becoming her favorite weapon against me. And each time she used it, I felt more silenced. Claire, on the other hand, was subtler. At 20, she had inherited my impulsiveness but none of my caution. She worked part-time at a boutique and spent money faster than she earned it. New clothes, gadgets, dinners out with friends. When I asked if she was keeping track of her finances, she laughed. "Relax, Mom. Everyone uses credit. I'll figure it out." I wanted to show her the eviction notices I once hid in kitchen drawers. Fees that piled higher than groceries, the hollow shame of telling a landlord, "I just need one more week." But Claire wouldn't hear it. To her, I was just being dramatic, stuck in the shadows of a life she thought had nothing to do with her. The more I tried to guide them, the more they pulled away. Conversations turned sharp, dinners grew quiet. They answered me with sighs, one-word replies, or not at all. Sometimes I would pass their bedroom doors and hear them whispering together, and my chest ached at the thought that I had become the outsider in my own home. It wasn't always this way. When they were little, they clung to me like I was the center of their world. I was the storyteller, the problem solver, the hero who made broken things whole again. I can still see Naomi at 6 years old, climbing into my lap after a nightmare, whispering, "Tell me a story, Mommy." The brave kind. And Claire, 4 years old, laughing when I turned spilled macaroni into a silly face on her plate. Back then, my words mattered. My presence was everything. But now, they had their own lives, their own ideas of truth. They saw my caution as paranoia, my wisdom as outdated, and the more I tried to hold on, the faster they seemed to drift. One evening, I found myself watching them get ready to go out with friends. Naomi in a fitted dress, Claire in ripped jeans and a glittery top, both of them glowing with the kind of freedom I never had at their age. For a moment, pride swelled in me. They were beautiful, strong, alive. But then Naomi's phone buzzed with a message from Travis, and I saw the way her face lit up. I saw Claire swipe her credit card into her purse like it was a magic key to endless possibilities. And in that moment, I didn't see freedom. I saw shadows of cycles I knew all too well. I wanted to grab them, hold them still, make them listen. But I also knew I couldn't force my daughters to see what they weren't ready to face. If I shouted warnings, they'd only shut me out more. And yet, if I stayed silent, they were bound to stumble into the same traps that nearly destroyed me. I started to feel like I was losing them slowly, inch by inch, every day. They were slipping through my fingers, not because they hated me, but because they thought they no longer needed me. The distance wasn't just emotional, it was physical too. Naomi spent more nights at Travis's place, while Claire stayed out late with friends. Sometimes days would pass with barely more than a hi or bye. The house that once overflowed with their voices now echoed with silence. I tried distracting myself. I worked longer shifts, cleaned obsessively, even picked up old hobbies like sketching. But nothing filled the hollow ache of being shut out of my own daughters' lives. The more they dismissed me, the more determined I became. I couldn't just sit back and hope they figured things out on their own. Hope wasn't enough. It was then that an idea began to form small at first, then growing stronger with every passing day. If my words weren't enough to bridge the distance, maybe actions would be. If stories weren't reaching them, maybe evidence would. I thought about the journals tucked away in my closet, the legal documents, the letters I had written to myself during the darkest times. I thought about the truths I had buried for 2 decades. Truths my daughters had never seen. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe the distance between us wasn't just their fault. Maybe it was also mine for keeping too much hidden. They saw me as a woman chained to her past because I had never shown them the chains. They thought I was stuck because I never showed them what it took to break free. That realization hit me like a wave. Maybe the only way to close the distance was to tear open the silence I had built to protect them. Maybe they didn't need my sugar-coated warnings. Maybe they needed the raw, unfiltered truth. Because as much as it hurt to admit, Naomi wasn't just falling for a man, she was walking straight toward a mirror of her father. And Claire wasn't just spending too much money, she was weaving herself into the same web of debt that once strangled me. The past was alive in them. It was breathing through their choices, their relationships, their futures. And if I didn't act soon, the distance between us would become permanent, not just emotional, but generational. I realized I couldn't just talk them out of danger. I needed to build a path so different that they couldn't escape the truth. Buried in my closet was a box I had avoided opening for over 20 years. It was pushed to the very back, covered by old blankets and forgotten shoes, almost as if I had been hiding it not just from the world, but from myself. The cardboard was worn, the tape frayed, and when I dragged it out, a puff of dust filled the air, making me cough. For a long time, I just sat there on the floor, staring at it. My hands trembled because I knew what was inside. I knew opening it would be like ripping open scars that never fully healed. But after the way my daughters dismissed me, I also knew I couldn't keep it closed anymore. That box held the pieces of my life I had locked away, the parts too heavy for two little girls to carry, the parts too shameful for me to admit. But now Naomi and Claire weren't little girls anymore. They were women, and women needed the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I pulled off the tape and lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of journals, the covers bent and stained with years of handling. There were loose papers stuffed between the pages, old photographs, and even folded envelopes with Victor's handwriting scrawled across them. At the very bottom were legal documents, restraining orders, court filings, eviction notices, my entire survival, captured in paper and ink. I picked up the first journal, dated 2001, the year Naomi was born. My handwriting was shaky, hurried, like a woman writing while a baby cried in the background. The first entry nearly undid me. Victor didn't come home again. I told myself he was working late, but the perfume on his shirt told another story. Naomi wouldn't stop crying tonight. I feel like I'm failing already. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not enough? I closed my eyes, pressing the journal to my chest. Reading those words was like stepping back into that tiny apartment, rocking Naomi in my arms while wondering how I would survive another day. Next, I unfolded a letter Victor had written during one of his apologies. His handwriting was smooth, practiced, almost romantic. Eliana, you know I only get angry because I love you. You push me, and I lose control. But it's because I care so much. Don't leave me, you'll never make it without me. I felt sick. I had kept that letter once as proof that maybe he wasn't all bad. Now, holding it years later, I saw it for what it really was: manipulation. Then came the photographs. One of Naomi's third birthday party. She was smiling, frosting smeared on her cheek, but in the background, my eyes looked hollow. There was a bruise on my arm I had tried to hide with long sleeves, but the camera caught the shadow of it anyway. Another photo of Claire at 2 years old, sitting in her high chair with a big grin. I remembered that day vividly. Victor had stormed out that morning, and I had cried for hours before forcing myself to put on a smile for the girls. That picture captured the lie I had lived. The performance of happiness while drowning in despair. I flipped through more journals, and each page felt like a scream from my younger self. Nights of hunger, panic attacks, begging landlords for more time. The details I had erased from my stories because I thought my daughters didn't need them. But now I realize they did. They needed to see the full cost of choices like the ones they were making. At the very bottom of the box, I found the eviction notices, red-stamped final warning letters that once kept me awake at night. I remembered the night I tucked Naomi and Claire into bed, whispering promises that everything would be okay while knowing I had no idea where we would live the next week. And then, tucked beneath the stack, I found something I had forgotten existed: a letter to myself. I had written it late one night during my separation from Victor, when I was on the verge of giving up. The paper was wrinkled from tears, but the words were still clear. Eliana, if you're reading this, it means you're still alive. You are stronger than you feel right now. Do not let your daughters grow up thinking silence is strength. Tell them the truth. Show them what survival looks like. One day, they will need it more than you realize. I broke down sobbing. I had written that to myself as a lifeline. And yet I had failed to follow my own advice. I had kept silent, trying to protect my daughters, when all along, I was supposed to share. As I sat there, surrounded by papers, I realized something important. This wasn't just a box of pain, it was also a box of proof. Proof of what I had endured, proof of what I had survived, proof that the past wasn't just in my head. This box was a weapon, a shield, a legacy. And for Naomi and Claire, it could be the map that saved them. I stacked the journals carefully, setting aside the documents and photos I thought they needed to see first. I didn't want to overwhelm them all at once. I knew they would resist, maybe even get angry. But little by little, I could show them pieces of the truth they had never known. It wasn't about forcing them to relive my pain. It was about helping them avoid their own. For the first time in years, I felt clarity. My past wasn't just something to move on from, it was a guidebook, one written in blood, sweat, and tears. And if my daughters wanted to dismiss it, fine. They would no longer be able to say they didn't know. I looked at the box and whispered, "It's time. Time to stop hiding. Time to stop protecting them from reality. Time to start rewriting, not through lectures or warnings, but through evidence they couldn't ignore. Because this box wasn't just my past. It was their future. With every page I touched, the future of my daughters began to change. I started with Naomi, my eldest, because she was closest to repeating my mistakes. She was wrapped up in Travis like he was oxygen, like she couldn't breathe without him. And I knew that look all too well, because it was the same way I once looked at Victor. That blind devotion, that willingness to excuse red flags, that dangerous combination of love and denial. The more I watched her with Travis, the more my chest tightened. He called her constantly, checking where she was, what she was doing, who she was with. She thought it was sweet. I thought it was control. He had a temper too, small things set him off. One night he slammed a glass down so hard at dinner that it shattered across the table. Naomi laughed nervously and brushed it off, saying he was just passionate. I had once used that same word to excuse Victor. I couldn't sit by and watch my daughter fall into the same trap, so I pulled out one of my old journals, the one from 2003, just before Claire was born. I flipped to a page where I had written about the first time Victor's anger truly scared me. Tonight he punched the wall right next to my head. He said he didn't mean it, that it was just stress. I told myself he was under pressure, that he didn't mean harm, but I felt my bones shake. What if next time he misses the wall? Reading those words again made my hands tremble. But I knew Naomi needed to see them. The next morning, I waited until she was home from class. She was scrolling on her phone, smiling at a text from Travis. I sat down beside her and placed the journal in her lap. "What's this?" she asked, frowning. "Just read it," I said quietly. She sighed, clearly annoyed, but flipped it open. As her eyes scanned the page, I saw her expression shift. Confusion, disbelief, then discomfort. She shut the journal quickly and pushed it back toward me. "Mom, why are you showing me this? I don't need to know all this depressing stuff." "Yes, you do," I told her firmly. "Because you're living it, Naomi. Maybe not as extreme yet, but I see the signs, the possessiveness, the temper. It's all too familiar." Her face hardened. "Travis isn't Dad. You can't keep comparing them. You're just projecting your issues onto me." There it was again, projecting. I bit my tongue to keep from snapping. Instead, I reached into the stack beside me and pulled out a photo. It was one of Victor and me at a party when we were newly married. He had his arm around me, smiling for the camera. To anyone else, we looked happy, but I remembered that night vividly. He had screamed at me in the car for talking to another man too long. I handed the photo to Naomi. "Look at his eyes. Look at his smile. Do you see how convincing he was? Everyone thought he was charming. I thought he was my savior. But behind that smile was a man who broke me piece by piece." Naomi stared at the photo for a long moment before looking away. "That doesn't mean Travis is like him." I leaned forward. "Naomi, do you know how many times I told myself that exact same thing? Do you know how many times I excused behavior because I wanted to believe in the fantasy instead of the truth?" She crossed her arms. "So what, you just expect me to dump him because you had a bad experience?" "No," I said softly. "I expect you to pay attention, to look at the signs I ignored, to protect yourself before it's too late." For a long time, she didn't respond. She just sat there, fidgeting with her phone, avoiding my eyes. Finally, she muttered, "You're overreacting." Then she grabbed her bag and left the house. The door slammed, and I felt my heart sink. But later that night, I heard her pacing in her room. She didn't come out, but I could tell my words had gotten under her skin. Maybe she wouldn't admit it, but she was thinking about it. And that was enough for now. The next week, I tried again. This time, I showed her a letter Victor had written after one of his outbursts. The words were dripping with charm and apology, almost identical to the texts Travis sent her after losing his temper. Naomi's hands trembled as she read it. This sounds like something Travis would say. I nodded. Because men like them all read from the same script, and if you don't recognize the script now, you'll live the ending I barely escaped. She didn't say a word, but I saw the crack in her certainty. She left the letter on the table instead of throwing it back at me. That small act told me more than any argument could. Over the next few days, she grew quieter around Travis. I noticed her rolling her eyes at his constant texts instead of smiling. I noticed her pulling away when he tried to hold her too tightly. She didn't break up with him, not yet. But the seed of doubt had been planted. And sometimes, a seed is all it takes to change the course of a life. For the first time, I felt hope. Maybe my daughters wouldn't have to repeat my mistakes. Maybe rewriting the future wasn't about forcing them to listen, it was about showing them enough of the truth that they couldn't unsee it. Naomi didn't thank me. She didn't even acknowledge that I had reached her. But one night, I caught her sitting on her bed with my journal open, reading silently by the glow of her lamp. She didn't notice me in the hallway, and I didn't interrupt. I just let her read. Because in that moment, I knew something had shifted. For the first time, I saw fear in Naomi's eyes, the fear that my past might be her present. If Naomi was repeating my love mistakes, Claire was repeating my survival mistakes. Where Naomi lost herself in a man, Claire lost herself in spending. She treated money like sand slipping through her fingers, impossible to hold on to, never lasting, always replaceable. I used to envy her carefree attitude, but lately, it frightened me. Because I knew exactly where that road ended. I had walked it before, and it led straight to hunger, shame, and desperation. Claire had always been my dreamer. Even as a child, she wanted the pretty dress, the sparkly shoes, the toy that shimmered under store lights. I tried to provide what I could, but back then, the dollar store was our mall. She never complained, at least, not out loud, but I could see the longing in her eyes. Now, as an adult, she seemed determined to give herself everything she felt she missed. Her closet was stuffed with clothes she barely wore, tags still hanging from some, makeup palettes, handbags, gadgets piled high like trophies. She worked part-time at a boutique, but her paycheck didn't even cover half of what she bought. Credit cards filled the gaps, and she swiped them like magic wands, promising herself she'd pay them later. One night, I walked past her room and saw her tossing receipts into the trash. Curiosity pulled me in, and when she left the room to grab water, I glanced at one of the crumpled slips. It was for $400 shoes she didn't need, couldn't afford, but bought anyway. My chest tightened. I remembered the first time I used credit like that, back when Victor had drained our bank account. I bought diapers and formula with a card I had no plan to pay off. At the time, I told myself it was survival. But later, it became habit. Then it became debt so deep I thought I'd drown. I couldn't watch Claire make the same mistakes. The next morning, I pulled out another piece of my hidden box. This time, it wasn't a journal, it was a stack of unpaid bills from 2005, when I was drowning. I still had the eviction notice stamped in bold red letters, final warning. I had hidden it in a kitchen drawer back then so Naomi and Claire wouldn't see it. I cried over it alone at night while they slept. I slipped the papers into an envelope and placed them on Claire's dresser. Later that evening, I heard her call out, "Mom, what's this?" I walked into her room. "Just read it," I said. She opened the envelope and unfolded the eviction notice. Her brows furrowed as she scanned it. "Wait, this was ours?" I nodded. "Yes, 2005. We were 3 days from being thrown out on the street. Do you remember the camping night we had in the living room with sleeping bags and flashlights?" She smiled faintly. "Yeah, you made it fun." I swallowed hard. "That wasn't camping. That was me hiding the fact that we were packing to leave. We almost lost everything, Claire." Her face fell. She shuffled through the other papers, the shut-off notice for electricity, the overdue phone bill, the final warning for late rent. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, her voice sharp. Because I see you walking toward the same cliff I nearly fell off. You're spending money you don't have, on things you don't need. I know what it feels like to think the bill won't catch up, but it always does. And when it does, it doesn't just take your money, it takes your freedom. She frowned, defensive. It's not the same, Mom. I'm not raising kids. I'm just enjoying life. Everyone has debt. I shook my head. That's exactly what I told myself. And by the time I realized it wasn't normal, I was drowning. I don't want you to drown too. She rolled her eyes and tossed the papers onto her bed. You're being dramatic. I'm fine. But I noticed something. She didn't throw the papers away. She left them there. That was enough to tell me my words had struck somewhere deeper than her stubbornness, I would admit. A week later, I heard her in the kitchen, whispering into the phone. I caught bits of the conversation. Yes, I know I missed the payment. I'll figure it out. When she hung up, she looked pale. Debt collectors? I asked softly. She froze. How did you know? Because I've been there, I said. I know that tone. I know the fear. Her eyes welled up, but she quickly brushed away the tears. I'm not like you, Mom. I'll fix it. Claire, I said gently, I thought the same thing, but debt doesn't get better by itself. It grows. It multiplies until you can't breathe. I don't want that for you. For the first time, she didn't snap back. She just sat at the table, staring at her hands, silent. I reached into my pocket and placed something in front of her, a tiny folded note I had written to myself in 2006. It said, "One more bill and I won't survive this." Claire read it and whispered, "You wrote this?" "Yes," I said. I was so deep in debt that I thought it would kill me. Not physically, but piece by piece, every time another notice came in the mail. Her lip trembled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she nodded slowly and whispered, "Maybe I need help." It wasn't a full surrender, but it was a crack in the wall she had built. And sometimes, that's all it takes. That night, I heard her in her room again, this time not shopping online, but scrolling through budgeting apps. I passed her door quietly, not wanting to interrupt. I knew it wouldn't be easy. She'd stumble again, maybe even fight me on it. But at least the seed was planted. She had seen the shadows of my past, and for the first time, she recognized them in her own reflection. Claire's silence after I handed her my eviction notice told me she finally understood where her path was heading. My daughters didn't accept my rewriting easily. They fought me at every turn. I had expected some resistance. After all, no one likes having their choices questioned, least of all young women convinced they're invincible. But I wasn't prepared for the storm that followed. Every truth I revealed, every warning I offered, was met with walls of anger, denial, and accusations that cut me deeper than they'll ever know. Naomi was the loudest. She hated me drawing parallels between Travis and her father. One evening, after I placed another one of Victor's old apology letters on the kitchen table, she exploded. "Why do you keep dragging him into this?" she shouted, slamming the letter shut. "Travis is nothing like Dad. You're obsessed, Mom. You can't let go of your bitterness, so you're trying to ruin my relationship." Her words stung because, in a way, they echoed my greatest fear that maybe I was obsessed. But deep down, I knew it wasn't obsession. It was recognition. It was survival speaking through me. Claire wasn't as loud, but her resistance cut just as deep. After I showed her the eviction notices and unpaid bills, she accused me of weaponizing trauma. Her exact words, "You're just trying to scare me," she said, folding her arms across her chest. "You're using your past as some horror story to control my choices." But guess what? It's my life, not yours. I don't have to live in fear the way you did. Control, trauma, projecting. Those words became their shields, the weapons they used to push me away. Every time they said them, I felt the distance growing. I wondered if I was making things worse by forcing the truth on them. But then I'd see the signs. Naomi's eyes darkening after a fight with Travis. Claire's phone buzzing with yet another missed payment alert. I knew they were teetering on the edge. I couldn't stop. The house grew tense, heavy with unspoken words. Meals together became rare, and when we did sit down, the silence was suffocating. Naomi scrolled through her phone, Claire picked at her food, and I sat there, feeling like an intruder in my own family. One night, Naomi came home late, her makeup smeared, her shoulders hunched. She avoided my eyes and rushed upstairs, but I saw the way her hands shook. I wanted to ask what happened, but I knew she'd snap at me, accuse me of prying, so I stayed silent. Another night, Claire's phone rang during dinner. She looked at the caller ID, went pale, and silenced it quickly. I didn't have to ask who it was, I knew the sound of debt collectors breathing down your neck. But when I tried to say gently, "You don't have to go through this alone," she muttered, "Stop making everything about you, Mom," and left the table. Every attempt I made to help seemed to push them further away. But at the same time, I noticed something strange despite their protests. They didn't throw away the things I showed them. Naomi left my journal on her nightstand. Claire tucked the eviction notice into her desk drawer. They didn't want me to know it, but the truth was seeping in, piece by piece. Still, the pushback wore on me. At night, I lay awake wondering if I was losing them for good. Maybe they would resent me forever. Maybe I was pushing so hard they'd run straight into the arms of the very dangers I was trying to protect them from. But every time that doubt threatened to silence me, I thought about Victor. I thought about the way he smiled at me right before his temper exploded. I thought about the eviction notice that nearly destroyed us. And I reminded myself silence had never saved me before. Why would it save them now? The tension finally erupted one Sunday afternoon. Naomi had just gotten off the phone with Travis, and she was pacing the living room, clearly upset. I asked softly, "Did he raise his voice at you again?" She froze, spun around, and glared at me. "Stop it, Mom. Stop trying to diagnose my relationship. Not everything is some replay of your miserable marriage." Claire jumped in, her voice sharp. "Yeah, Mom. You're suffocating us. It's like you want us to fail just so you can say, 'I told you so.'" That broke me. Tears filled my eyes, and I whispered, "I don't want you to fail. I want you to survive." But they weren't listening anymore. Naomi stormed out, slamming the door. Claire retreated to her room, blasting music loud enough to shake the walls. I sat alone on the couch, shaking. For the first time, I wondered if I should stop. Maybe I was pushing too hard, but then the front door creaked open hours later, and Naomi stepped inside. Her mascara was streaked, her hands trembling. She avoided my eyes, but I noticed the bruise forming on her wrist. She whispered, almost to herself, "He grabbed me too hard, but he didn't mean it." And in that moment, every doubt vanished. I knew then that silence was no longer an option. They could fight me, accuse me, hate me, but I would not let them walk blind into the shadows I barely escaped. The resistance was strong, but the cracks in their certainty were finally showing. The night Naomi came home crying, I knew my rewrite was working, though not in the way I had imagined. It was just past midnight when I heard the front door creak open. I was half asleep on the couch, waiting for her. She stumbled inside, her makeup smeared, her shoulders hunched as if the weight of the world was pressing her down. She didn't see me at first. She went straight to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and leaned against the counter with shaking hands. "Naomi?" I whispered. She jumped, startled, and then her eyes met mine. Red, swollen, broken. My heart clenched. "He cheated," she blurted out, her voice cracking. "Travis cheated on me." For a moment, I couldn't move. I wanted to scream that I saw it coming, that I had warned her, that men like Travis were copies of Victor cut from the same cloth. but instead, I crossed the room and wrapped my arms around her. She collapsed against me, sobbing so hard my shirt dampened. "He said it was just once," she choked out, "that it didn't mean anything. But he lied to me, Mom. Over and over. How could I not see it?" I stroked her hair, whispering softly, "Because you wanted to believe in love. And there's no shame in that, Naomi. But now you know. Now you see what I saw." For the first time, she didn't push me away. She didn't accuse me of projecting or call me bitter. She just cried, clinging to me the way she used to when she was little. And in her tears, I saw the reflection of my younger self, the girl who once believed Victor's lies, who once thought love could heal everything. But Naomi wasn't a little girl anymore. She had choices I never felt brave enough to make. The next morning, she sat at the kitchen table, her eyes puffy, her voice hollow. "I think you're right, Mom. He's just like Dad." Hearing her say those words out loud was like watching a dam crack. She was finally seeing what I had seen all along. But even as Naomi's walls began to break, Claire's were crumbling in another way. It happened just a week later. I came home from work and found her sitting at the table with a pile of unopened envelopes scattered in front of her. Credit card statements, collection notices, overdue bills. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. "I can't do it anymore," she whispered as I walked in. "I thought I could manage it, but I'm drowning, Mom." I sat across from her, my stomach twisting. I picked up one of the envelopes, saw the bold red numbers screaming "past due," and felt a familiar sting in my chest. "Claire," I said gently, "this is exactly where I was when you were little. Do you remember the night we had a picnic on the floor with flashlights?" She nodded weakly. "That wasn't a picnic. That was me stalling because the lights were shut off. I was terrified. And you're walking the same road now." Her lip trembled. "I didn't think it would get this bad. I just wanted to live. To have nice things." I reached across the table and took her hands. "I know. I wanted the same. But survival isn't built on nice things. It's built on stability, discipline, choices that don't look glamorous but keep you alive." She finally broke then. Tears slid down her cheeks as she whispered, "I think I need help, Mom. Real help." I hugged her tightly. Just as I had hugged Naomi days before. For the first time, both my daughters were standing at the edge of the cliff I had once fallen from, and for the first time, they were looking back at me for guidance instead of running ahead blind. But with their breaking points came something else: anger. Naomi, though devastated, turned some of her pain on me. One night she shouted, "Why didn't you tell us sooner? Why didn't you just say Dad was a monster instead of hiding it? Maybe I wouldn't have wasted years with Travis if you had told me the truth." Claire, too, asked bitterly, "Why did you always make it seem like we were fine when we weren't? Why didn't you just let us see the struggle? Maybe then I wouldn't have been so careless." Their words cut me deeply. Because they were right. I had hidden the darkest parts to protect them. But in doing so, I had left them unarmed. My silence, born from love, had become the very reason they didn't trust my warnings. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that they had been just children, too young for such heavy truths. But looking at their faces, I realized they weren't asking for excuses. They were asking for honesty. So I gave it to them. I told Naomi about the first time Victor hit me. I told Claire about the night I thought we would end up on the street. I told them everything I had hidden in that box of papers and journals, the truths I once swore I'd never let them carry. They cried. They grew quiet. They didn't thank me. But I could see the shift. For the first time, my daughters were no longer dismissing me as someone stuck in the past. They were beginning to see that the past wasn't dead at all. It was alive in them, in their choices, in their pain. That night, after they went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the shadows on the wall. My heart ached with both relief and sorrow. Relief because they were finally seeing the truth. Sorrow because it had taken so much pain to get here. I realized then that rewriting the future wasn't going to be a clean, beautiful process. It was going to be messy, painful, filled with anger and blame. My daughters might hate me for it, They might never forgive me for the years of silence. But I also knew the alternative, that if I stayed silent, I would watch them walk straight into destruction. And that was a pain I couldn't bear. So I made myself a promise. No matter how hard they pushed, no matter how much they accused me, I would keep going. I would keep rewriting, even if it cost me their love. Because better to lose their love than to watch them lose their futures. That was the night I realized rewriting the future meant risking losing them entirely. I gathered my daughters in the living room, and for the first time, I told them everything. It wasn't planned. I hadn't written notes or chosen the right moment. It happened on an ordinary evening, when the tension in the house was so thick it felt like we were all suffocating under it. Naomi sat curled on one end of the couch, scrolling aimlessly through her phone. Claire sat on the other side, pretending to study but really just staring blankly at her laptop screen. I stood in the doorway, clutching one of my journals, and I realized the silence between us was louder than any fight we had ever had. So I spoke. "Girls," I said, my voice trembling. "I need you to listen, really listen, because I've spent your whole lives protecting you from the truth, and I can't do it anymore." Naomi sighed, not even looking up. Claire muttered, "Mom," in that tone that begged me not to start again. But I pressed on. "You think I talk about the past because I'm stuck, because I can't move on. But the truth is, I've been keeping most of it from you. And if I don't tell you now, you're going to make choices that will break you the same way they almost broke me." That made them look up. Naomi's eyes narrowed. Claire's lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time, I had their attention. I sat down, opened the journal in my lap, and began. I told them about Victor. Not the watered-down version they'd grown up hearing, the one where he was difficult or unreliable. I told them the truth. How he controlled me, manipulated me, and turned my love into chains. How the first time he hit me, I convinced myself it was my fault. How the second time, I convinced myself it was stress. How by the 10th time, I stopped making excuses and just tried to survive. Their eyes widened. Naomi's hands gripped the cushion so tight her knuckles turned white. Claire whispered, "He hit you?" Like she couldn't believe the words. "Yes," I said, my throat raw. And worse, not always physically. Sometimes it was words that cut deeper than bruises. Sometimes it was silence that made me feel invisible. He drained me my money, my spirit, my hope. And I stayed because I thought I couldn't live without him. Because I thought you needed me to stay. Naomi shook her head. "Why didn't you tell us? We had a right to know." Tears welled in my eyes. "Because you were children. You were so little, and I wanted you to feel safe. I wanted you to believe the world was kind, even when it wasn't. So I hid it. I smiled through bruises, I turned eviction notices into adventures, and I made empty cupboards into picnics on the floor. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just lying." Claire's voice cracked. "Mom, all those times you said we were fine. We weren't, were we?" I shook my head. "No, sweetheart. We weren't. We were surviving. And surviving is not the same as fine." They both sat in stunned silence, the weight of my words pressing down on all of us. I turned to Naomi. "When I warn you about Travis, it's not because I hate him. It's because I've seen this before. I know where it leads. Men like him don't change, Naomi. They only tighten their grip." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't argue this time. She just looked away, swallowing hard. Then I turned to Claire. "When I tell you to be careful with money, it's not because I don't trust you. It's because I know how quickly it can destroy you. Debt isn't just numbers on paper, it's a weight that follows you everywhere. It steals your sleep, your dignity, your freedom. I don't want you to feel the same crushing fear I felt every time the phone rang." Her lip trembled. She whispered, "I didn't know it was that bad for you." I reached out, placing my hands over theirs. "Of course you didn't, because I didn't let you see it, and that's my biggest regret. I thought I was sparing you, but I was only leaving you unprepared." The three of us sat there, the silence thick with everything unsaid over the years. I had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable. It was like I had ripped open my chest and handed them my bleeding heart. Naomi finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know. I thought you just liked dwelling on things. I didn't realize it was this." Claire nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I feel like I don't even know you. Like there's this whole part of you we never saw." "You didn't," I admitted. "Because I wanted you to see strength, not weakness. I wanted you to see a mother who could handle anything. But the truth is, I couldn't handle everything. I barely handled enough to get us here. And I don't want you to make the same mistake pretending you're fine until you're shattered." The room felt heavier than ever, but also lighter somehow, like years of silence had finally cracked open. We didn't hug. We didn't instantly heal. They didn't suddenly say, "Thank you, Mom. We understand now." No. They sat quietly, processing, their faces a mix of pain, shock, and sorrow. And that was enough for me. Because for the first time, they weren't dismissing me. They weren't rolling their eyes or calling me bitter. They were listening. Later that night, when they went to their rooms, I sat alone in the living room. I stared at the old journals spread across the table, my heart still pounding. Had I said too much? Had I broken them with truths they weren't ready to hear? Maybe. But I also knew one thing with certainty. Silence had failed us. Honesty, no matter how raw, was our only chance left. I didn't know if they'd forgive me. I didn't know if they'd see me differently now, less as their mother, more as a broken woman who had stumbled through life. But I knew this. The story was finally out. The chains of silence were gone. And now, whether they loved me for it or hated me, they would carry the truth with them. As I looked into their eyes, I knew I had only one chance left to secure the rewrite. Rewriting their future wasn't about changing their choices, it was about changing their vision. After the confession, something shifted in my daughters. The house still felt tense, but it wasn't the same kind of tension as before. It wasn't the tension of avoidance or anger. It was the tension of realization, of sitting in silence and realizing the world wasn't as safe, simple, or forgiving as they had once believed. And that was where I had to begin, not with more warnings, but with guidance. Real, tangible steps. With Naomi, the first step was Travis. She didn't break up with him immediately. I didn't expect her to. Leaving someone you've convinced yourself you love isn't a decision made overnight. But I noticed the small cracks, the way she hesitated when he called, the way she flinched when he raised his voice, even if it wasn't directed at her. One evening, she asked, "Mom, do you think people like Dad ever really change?" I looked her in the eye. "They change, Naomi, but never in the way you hope. They change for the worse. The apologies get sweeter, the lies get sharper, the grip gets tighter. That's the only change they know." She didn't argue. She just nodded. Her eyes clouded. And a week later, she told me she was taking a break from Travis. It wasn't permanent, but it was a start. During that time, I sat with her and showed her more from my journal's entries where I wrote about the cycle of abuse, the patterns that repeated like clockwork. "Do you see?" I told her. "It's not just about what he does, it's about how you excuse it. That's what traps you." Her silence told me she saw it. With Claire, the path was different. Her breaking point with debt had left her shaken, but she didn't know how to start digging herself out. So I took her hand and said, "We'll do it together." We spread her bills across the kitchen table one evening, credit card statements, late fees, overdraft notices. Her eyes filled with shame. "I don't even know where to start," she admitted. I smiled softly. "That's okay. I didn't either. But I learned. And now I can teach you." We built a budget together. I showed her how to track expenses, how to cut unnecessary spending, how to put aside even small amounts for savings. At first, she groaned, rolling her eyes at the restrictions. But then, as the weeks went on, I noticed her pride when she stuck to the plan. "Mom," she said one afternoon, showing me her bank app, I actually have money left over this week. The sparkle in her eyes reminded me of the little girl who once laughed at my picnic nights. Except now, it wasn't a game, it was real security. I also pushed both of them toward outside help. Therapy, financial counseling, support systems I had never had but wished I did. Naomi resisted at first. "I don't need a therapist," she said flatly. I looked at her gently. "Naomi, if I had had someone to talk to back then, maybe I wouldn't have stayed with your father so long. Maybe I would have seen the truth sooner. Therapy isn't weakness, it's survival." After weeks of nudging, she finally agreed to one session. And when she came home, quieter than usual but softer somehow, I knew it had stirred something inside her. Claire, surprisingly, embraced it faster. She admitted to her financial counselor that she was scared of turning into her mom at 25. I laughed when she told me that, not because it was funny, but because it was honest. "Then learn from me," I told her. "Don't repeat me." Slowly, the changes began to ripple through the house. Naomi spent more time with friends who uplifted her instead of isolating with Travis. Claire started cooking at home instead of eating out every night. The girls even asked me for advice, not mockingly, not dismissively, but genuinely. It was strange. For years, my words had been dismissed as nagging, as bitterness. But now, when they asked, "Mom, what would you do?" it felt like my voice finally mattered again. One night, Naomi sat with me at the table, flipping through an old photo album. She paused at a picture of me when I was about her age. "You look so happy here," she said softly. I laughed, bitter and sweet all at once. That was the night Victor bought me flowers after screaming at me for hours. I smiled for the camera, but inside I was broken. Naomi traced the edge of the photo, with her finger, her eyes glistening. "I don't want that, Mom. I don't want to smile for pictures and feel dead inside." "Then don't. Learn from me. Break the cycle." And she nodded. Really nodded. As if she finally believed me. Claire, meanwhile, surprised me one Saturday morning. She placed her credit card on the counter and said, "Cut it up, Mom. I don't trust myself with it anymore." I stared at her, stunned, before picking up the scissors. Snip. The sound of the plastic breaking was louder than I expected, echoing through the kitchen. Claire exhaled like she had just freed herself from shackles. We hugged, and for the first time, I felt the distance between us shrinking. But the journey wasn't smooth. There were setbacks. Naomi met up with Travis again, just to talk. Claire splurged on a shopping spree one weekend and cried when she realized what she'd done. But instead of hiding it from me, they came to me. They let me help. That was the difference. They were no longer running blind into the dark. They were letting me hold the flashlight. And in those moments, I realized something important. Rewriting the future wasn't about controlling my daughters. It wasn't about forcing them to live the life I thought they should live. It was about giving them the tools I never had. It was about making sure they had choices, not chains. For the first time in years, I looked at Naomi and Claire and didn't just see shadows of my past. I saw sparks of a future that could be different, stronger, brighter. For the first time, I saw the glimmer of a future that wasn't chained to my past. Just when I thought the rewrite was succeeding, the past clawed its way back. It started with a knock at the door on a quiet Tuesday evening. I wasn't expecting anyone, so when I opened it and saw Victor standing there, it felt like the air was sucked out of my lungs. He looked older, thinner, his hair graying at the temples. Eyes, those same charming, dangerous eyes, were exactly as I remembered. He smiled like no time had passed at all, as if decades of damage could be erased with one grin. "Hello, Eliana," he said smoothly, like we were old friends. "Mind if I come in?" My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to slam the door in his face, but before I could react, Naomi appeared behind me. "Dad?" she gasped. Her voice cracked on the word, and I froze. She had never called him that before, not in years, not since she was a child who barely remembered him. Claire came down the stairs, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What's going on?" she asked, glancing between us. Victor smiled wider. his gaze flicking to our daughters. My girls. Look at you. All grown up. I felt sick. He didn't deserve to look at them, let alone call them his, but Naomi stepped closer. Why are you here? I've been doing a lot of thinking, Victor said, his voice dripping with rehearsed sincerity. I made mistakes, many mistakes, but I want to make amends. I want to reconnect, if you'll let me. I saw it instantly, the way Naomi's face softened, the way Claire tilted her head in curiosity. They had longed for answers their whole lives, and here he was, offering the illusion of closure. No, I said firmly, blocking the doorway. You don't get to walk back into our lives like nothing happened. But Naomi frowned. Mom, maybe we should hear him out. My heart dropped. Naomi, you don't understand. He's not here for you. He's here to manipulate. Victor chuckled, that same low, patronizing laugh that once made me feel small. You haven't changed, Eliana, still so dramatic. Girls, don't listen to her. She's always wanted to paint me as the villain. Claire crossed her arms. Is that true, Mom? Did you exaggerate things? The question pierced me like a knife. After everything I had revealed, after all the scars I had bared, my daughters still doubted me. That was Victor's power. He could twist reality so easily that even truth felt like a lie. I wanted to scream, but instead, I forced myself to stay calm. No, Claire, every word I told you was real, and I can prove it. I left them standing there with Victor, and returned with the box, the journals, the letters, the documents. I spread them across the table like evidence in a trial. Victor's face tightened, but he quickly composed himself. Really, Eliana? Digging up old papers? You're obsessed. This is what I mean, girls. Your mother has always lived in the past. She can't let go. Naomi glanced at the papers uncertainly. Is it true? She asked him. Did you hurt her? Victor sighed dramatically. I lost my temper sometimes. Who hasn't? But she makes it sound worse than it was. I loved your mother. I loved you both. She just wanted control. That word control made my blood boil. It was the exact word he used years ago when he tried to justify his abuse. I slid a restraining order across the table. This isn't a story, Victor. It's a fact. Court issued. You can lie all you want, but you can't erase this. Claire picked it up, her hands trembling. Her eyes darted between us, searching for the truth. Victor stepped closer, his voice soft, coaxing. Girls, you've only ever heard her side. Don't you want to hear mine? Don't you deserve to know your father for yourself? For a terrifying moment, I saw the pull in Naomi's eyes, the longing for the father she never had. That was his weapon. Not violence this time, but the fantasy of redemption. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Naomi, remember Travis. Remember how charm blinded you. This is the same. He hasn't changed. He never will. Victor's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. I know I hurt your mother, but I can be different with you. Don't let her bitterness poison you against me. Bitterness. Projecting. Control. He was playing the same game he always had, but now with my daughters as the prize. I knew I couldn't win this by yelling. I couldn't drag them away from him by force. If I did, he'd only look more convincing as the victim. So I stayed steady. I let the documents speak. I let my daughters sit with the uncomfortable truths. Finally, Naomi whispered, I don't know what to believe. Claire nodded, her voice small. Me neither. Victor saw his chance. Believe me, he said gently. I'm your father. Blood doesn't lie. But I leaned in, my eyes burning into theirs. Blood doesn't protect you either. Remember that. The room was heavy with silence, the weight of decades pressing down on all of us. For the first time in years, I felt powerless again. Like Victor had pulled me back into his shadow. And yet, I saw something in my daughters too. Confusion. Yes. But also doubt. They weren't falling for him instantly. They were questioning. That meant my rewrite wasn't lost. But it also meant the hardest test had just begun. As Victor stood in my doorway, smiling like nothing ever happened, I knew the rewrite was about to face its hardest test. Confronting Victor after 2 decades was like staring into the eyes of my own nightmares. He lingered around the edges of our lives for weeks after that first visit. Sometimes it was a phone call Naomi took in her room with the door closed. Sometimes it was a text Claire tried to hide from me. Once, I even saw his car parked down the street. He wasn't just testing boundaries, he was circling, like a predator waiting for weakness. I knew if I didn't face him directly, he would sink his claws into my daughters, and this time, instead of breaking me, he'd break them. So I invited him over. Not because I wanted him there, but because I refused to let him slither into their lives behind my back. I needed them to see him clearly. In the light, with no shadows to hide in. When he walked in, he had that same smooth swagger, as if the years had never touched him. He smiled at Naomi and Claire like he'd earned the right to. "It's good to see you both again," he said warmly. I stood between him and my daughters, my arms folded. "We're not here for small talk, Victor. We're here for the truth." He tilted his head, feigning hurt. "The truth? Or your version of it?" Naomi shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Claire avoided my eyes. They were torn, still wanting to believe in him, still hoping for the father they never had. That was exactly what he was counting on. So I did what I had never dared to do before. I brought out the records. I laid them on the coffee table, police reports, court filings, restraining orders, all the documents I had once tucked away in shame. I opened my journals to the entries where I'd described his rages, his betrayals, his cruelty. Victor laughed lightly, but I saw the flicker in his eyes. He hadn't expected me to bring evidence. "Girls," he said smoothly, "your mother's always had a flair for dramatics. She writes things down when she's upset, makes everything sound worse than it really was." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Read them. Read my words from 20 years ago. Look at the dates, the police signatures, the court stamps. These aren't stories, Naomi. They're facts." Claire hesitated, then picked up one of the papers. Her lips moved silently as she read. Her hands shook. Naomi leaned over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the lines. Victor tried to interrupt. "You don't have to read that garbage. It's all in the past. I'm not that man anymore." I locked eyes with him. "You're exactly the same. You're still twisting words, still making excuses, still trying to rewrite reality. But this time, I won't let you." For a moment, the mask slipped. His jaw tightened, his voice sharp. "You always were ungrateful. I gave you everything, and you repaid me, and with lies." I stood taller, my voice rising. "You gave me bruises. You gave me fear. You gave me 2 daughters I had to raise alone because you abandoned us. Don't you dare stand here and pretend you gave us anything worth keeping." The room went silent. Naomi's eyes were wide. Claire's face was pale. And Victor, he finally looked exposed. Naomi turned to him slowly. "Is it true? Did you really hurt her like this?" Victor stammered, searching for charm that no longer landed. Things were complicated. Your mother provoked me. She... Stop," Claire said suddenly, her voice trembling but firm. "Don't blame her. Don't you dare." I felt tears sting my eyes. My daughters finally they were seeing the truth. Naomi's voice cracked. "You're just like Travis." Victor blinked. "Who?" "No one," Naomi snapped. "But I see it now. I see it in you." The same fake apologies. The same lies. Claire threw the paper down, her hands shaking. "You're disgusting." Victor's face darkened. "You think your mother's perfect? She's filled your heads with poison against me for years. She's the reason you grew up without a father." I took a deep breath and stepped closer, my voice like steel. "No, Victor, you're the reason. You chose alcohol over family. You chose violence over love. You chose absence over responsibility. Don't you dare put that on me." He glared at me, but I didn't flinch. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't the girl he broke. I was the woman who survived. Naomi stood too, her hands clenched. I don't want you in my life. Claire nodded, her chin trembling but firm. Me neither. The words seemed to hit him harder than anything I had said. His smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. You'll regret this, he hissed. No, I said quietly. We'll survive this. Like we always have. He stared at me one last time, his face twisting with anger he could no longer mask. Then he turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence afterward was deafening. My daughters stood frozen, breathing heavily, as if they'd just stepped out of a storm. I sank onto the couch, my whole body trembling. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Naomi sat beside me, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't believe you. I didn't see it. I wrapped my arms around her. You weren't supposed to see it, that was the point, but now you do. Claire sat on my other side, her voice breaking. He almost fooled me. I wanted to believe he cared. But now I know. I pulled them both close, kissing their hair, my tears falling freely. That's what matters. You see him for who he really is. And you'll never mistake that kind of poison for love again. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because Victor was gone, he'd always haunt me in some way, but because his power over us had finally broken. My daughters had seen the truth with their own eyes. And in that moment, I realized something important. My past wasn't just mine anymore. It was theirs too, but not as a curse, as a shield. When Victor stormed out that night, I knew I had finally broken the cycle he tried to leave behind. For the first time in years, my daughters actually asked me to talk about the past. It happened a few nights after Victor stormed out of our home. We were sitting at the dining table, eating a quiet dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, nothing special. The air felt different, though. Lighter, safer. And then Naomi put down her fork, looked at me with tired but softened eyes, and said, Mom, tell us what it was really like back then. All of it. Claire nodded, her voice gentle. Yeah, we want to know. Not the sugar-coated version, the real version. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I had spent so many years silenced by fear, by shame, by my own misguided attempts to protect them that I didn't know how to start. But their faces were open, vulnerable, ready. So I told them. I told them about the first time I met Victor, how he swept me off my feet, how I mistook control for care. I told them about the nights I worked until dawn, dragging myself home just in time to kiss them good morning. I told them about hiding eviction notices in kitchen drawers, about eating crackers while pretending I wasn't hungry, about crying in the shower so they wouldn't hear. They didn't interrupt. They didn't roll their eyes. They didn't accuse me of living in the past. They listened, really listened. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they reached for my hand. And when I faltered, when the memories threatened to choke me, they urged me gently to go on. It was the first time I realized that my past didn't have to be a burden. It could be a bridge. The days that followed felt different. Our conversations shifted. Instead of dismissing me, Naomi and Claire leaned into my stories, asking questions, drawing lessons. Naomi asked, What were the first signs with Dad? What should I look for so I don't fall into that again? Claire asked, How did you get out of debt when it felt impossible? What helped you the most? And I answered honestly, not as a lecturer, not as a bitter woman clinging to scars, but as a survivor passing on hard-earned wisdom. Naomi began to change in small but powerful ways. She blocked Travis's number. She deleted old photos of them together. She started spending time with friends who treated her with respect, who lifted her up instead of dragging her down. One night, she told me, Mom, I'm learning to be okay on my own. I don't need someone else to define me. Hearing that was like hearing myself finally win the battle I'd been fighting for decades. Claire, too, began shifting. She stuck to her budget, and for the first time, she had savings at the end of the month. She started cooking meals at home, even inviting me to help sometimes. The pride in her eyes when she showed me her bank account was something I'll never forget. Look, Mom, she said one evening, holding up her phone. I'm not drowning anymore. I hugged her, whispering, "That's because you learned to swim before the water pulled you under." The bond between the three of us deepened. Family dinners turned into conversations instead of battles. We laughed more, we cried more, we spoke more. And every time they asked me to tell a story about back then, I felt a piece of the distance between us dissolve. One Saturday afternoon, Naomi came into the living room carrying one of my old journals. She sat beside me and said, "Mom, can you help me start one of my own?" Claire overheard and chimed in, "Me too. I want to write things down before I forget them." So we spent that afternoon writing together, me, in a new notebook, them in blank journals of their own. We didn't just write about pain, we wrote about dreams, about lessons, about the kind of women we wanted to be. It was the beginning of something new, a shared legacy, not of silence, but of truth. For the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting their lives, I felt like a guide walking beside them. But perhaps the most healing moment came one night when Naomi looked at me across the table and said, "Mom, I used to think you were stuck in the past. But now I see you were carrying it alone. And you don't have to anymore." Her words cracked something open inside me. For so long, I had believed that sharing my story would burden them. But in truth, it was the silence that had weighed us down. Once the truth was out, it didn't break us, it bound us together. Claire added softly, "The past isn't depressing anymore. It's inspiring. Because you survived it. And that means we can survive whatever comes our way." I cried that night. But not from pain. From relief. From gratitude. From finally feeling seen not just as their mother, but as a woman who had lived, fought, and endured. The past had once been the wedge that drove us apart. Now, it was the thread, stitching us back together. And as I looked at my daughters stronger, wiser, still growing, but finally on their own paths, I realized something important. I wasn't living in the past anymore. I was teaching the future. The past was no longer a wound in our house, it became the foundation of our future. I never truly rewrote my daughter's future, I simply handed them the pen I once had taken from myself. For so long I thought rewriting meant controlling, steering, forcing them away from the mistakes I made. But somewhere along the way, I learned the truth. Rewriting wasn't about dictating their story. It was about equipping them with the truth so they could write their own. Life didn't magically become easy after Victor stormed out, or after my confession, or even after Naomi walked away from Travis and Claire cut up her credit card. No life remained messy, unpredictable, full of temptations and struggles. But the difference now was that my daughters weren't blind to the shadows. They knew what danger looked like. They recognized the traps. And most importantly, they trusted me enough to come to me when they stumbled. One evening, Naomi sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hair tied back, her face tired but steady. "Mom," she said softly, "I never thought I'd say this, but thank you for not giving up on me, even when I hated you for it." Her words pierced me in the best way possible. I reached across the table, squeezed her hand, and whispered, "You don't have to thank me. That's what mothers do. We hold on, even when you try to push us away." Claire had her own moment too. After weeks of budgeting, she proudly showed me her first real savings balance. Not much, just a few $100s, but it was hers, earned and kept. "Mom," she said, smiling through tears. "For the first time I feel in control. Not scared. Not reckless. Just stable." I hugged her tightly. "That's worth more than any purchase you could make." It struck me then how different my daughter's futures already looked from my past. Naomi was learning to value herself without a man. Claire was learning to value her future over fleeting pleasures. And me? I was finally learning to value my voice not as a nagging echo of the past, but as a guide for the future. We began new traditions. Weekly dinners where we shared not just food but truths. Journaling nights where we wrote down lessons, fears, dreams. Even movie nights turned into conversations about relationships, finances, choices. The very topics they once shut me out for became the glue that held us together. But more than anything, I felt a peace I hadn't known in decades. Because for the first time, I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't silenced. My story wasn't buried in a dusty box or trapped in my throat. It was alive, shared, woven into my daughters' lives as a living reminder of both danger and hope. Sometimes I wonder if they'll truly understand the weight of what I carried until they have children of their own. Maybe they'll only fully grasp it when they're faced with sleepless nights, bills they don't know how to pay, or heartbreaks that feel like the end of the world. But even if they never fully understand, I know this. They'll never face those moments unprepared. Because now they carry not just my blood, but my story. Looking back, I realize I spent too many years ashamed of staying with Victor, ashamed of the debt, ashamed of the bruises I hid and the lies I told myself. But my daughters taught me something too. Shame loses its power when you speak it out loud. What I thought would break them has instead become the very thing that binds us. One night, Naomi said something I'll never forget. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. She turned to me and said, "Mom, you didn't just survive your past, you gave it meaning. And now, because of you, I don't have to repeat it," Claire added softly. "Neither do I." Tears streamed down my face as I pulled them both close. That was the moment I knew the rewrite was complete. Not perfect, not polished, but real. And maybe that's all rewriting really is, taking the broken pieces and arranging them into something new. Something strong enough to carry forward. I don't know what the future holds for my daughters. They'll make mistakes, I'm sure of it. They'll face heartbreaks, losses, challenges I can't predict. But I also know this. They'll face them with eyes wide open, with wisdom I didn't have, with strength they've already shown. And if they stumble, they'll know they can always come back to me, not for sugar-coated stories, but for the truth. Because in the end, my story was never about dwelling on the past. It was about ensuring their future. So, when people ask me now why I still talk about what happened, I smile. I don't talk about the past because I'm trapped in it. I talk about it because it freed me. Because it freed my daughters. Because it turned silence into survival, shame into strength, wounds into warnings. And if Naomi and Claire ever have children of their own, I hope they'll do the same. I hope they'll tell their stories, the good, the bad, the heartbreaking, so the cycle never repeats. I used to believe rewriting the future meant erasing the past. But now I know it's the opposite. Rewriting means embracing the past, giving it voice, and using it to carve a new path forward. As I sit here tonight, journaling once again while my daughters laugh in the next room, I feel something I never thought I would: peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because I know we're no longer trapped, we're no longer silenced, we're no longer chained to a man who tried to break us or a world that told us to forget. We are rewritten. And so, when my children told me to stop talking about the past, they never imagined that the past would be the very thing that saved their future.